Welcome back, everyone, to our second episode of Bookish Banter. This is a little bit late for the month of December. We read A Clockwork Orange and by Anthony Burgess. Hopefully, you all read along with us. I'm joined again with my nice co-host and friend, Colin,
Hello.
Dr. Colin. I'll put that in there again.
It's Doc Brown because I travel
Yes,
through time. Yeah.
yes, yes. Um, So yeah, we read A Clockwork Orange for the month of December. We're recording this a little bit late, mostly because of holidays, and I was a little under the weather, as was Colin. So we're
I
jumping
was
into it a little bit late.
I was violently under the weather.
Oh,
I was explosively under the weather.
oh no, oh my! I will not pry any further
No, well,
on stream.
we're talking about such a violent book today that I feel like I can
Yes, fair enough, fair enough. But we are. Yeah, I'm gonna tease this up. I'm gonna mention it again at the end, but we are going to be, as you've sort of figured out, we're going to be doing these once a month. So at the end of the month of January, we'll be discussing Franz Kafka's The Trial, which I have not read. Colin has read, and I'm sure it'll be interesting from what I've read about snippets. But we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. So
I'm gonna
let's.
read it in the original German. Der Prozess. You're gonna like it. You'll like it. It's good.
I think so. I think so. But we'll jump into A Clockwork Orange first.
Speaking
I
of speaking of foreign languages, A Clockwork Orange.
yes, yes. I liked your little preface that you and I discussed sort of offline before we jumped into the recording is it is you're very correct. It is a dystopian novel that no one thinks of as a dystopian novel. So I'll let you regale the other fine folks about what you mean by that.
Yeah, no, it's thank you. I will thank you yet again as host of the show for letting me choose this book because it's really not like comfort reading. Nothing is that we read here, but this one really, maybe it's just me. This is still, I think I said it last time when we were teasing this episode. This is probably one of the more profane books I've ever read in my life. The stuff that
For
it
sure.
talks about is very disturbing.
Yeah.
Um, and that's the goal. It's also damn funny, which makes you. I think it should make you feel uncomfortable. The conjunction of humor and violence is, um, it's not slapstick violence. It's real horror show ultra violence in here.
Yeah.
And but the flippancy of it's definitely a book. It's not that long of a book. It's very
No.
doable in terms of length of time or time to read it, but it's dystopian because not just because of the setting, it sort of takes place in the future in Britain, sort of in the future from a 1960s perspective.
Right.
Um, it's sort of that, the near future, whatever that is. It's dystopian not just because it deals with societal breakdown, although that is, I think, sort of one of the main narratives, and we'll get into that. Spoilers abound, as always. So, but it's also dystopian in the way it depicts government authority. It depicts an authoritarian state that is only sometimes overtly authoritarian. We could argue this, but we could hash this out if you want at some point in the episode here. Like the police beatings and the violent police activity, and the fact that like the police themselves are ex-droogs, they're ex-gangsters, is something that feels very like, the Stasi is going to pull you out with dogs and make you sit in a small room and, Gestapo, like secret police. It feels a bit like that. That is like overtly totalitarian. It's overtly dystopian, but there's a psychological dystopian quality to the book as well, to the story, in that it's all about the state, capital S, reprogramming people to
Hmm.
be good, and what happens when a central authority no longer seeks to uphold laws and punish crime so much as prevent crime. And I mean, this is kind of, you can see the influence on people like Philip K. Dick, where the idea of thought, like, it's not just an Orwellian thought crime kind of situation. It's like the state here doesn't really care what you think. So different in many ways than like a 1984. It cares what you do, but the lengths and the ways that the state will go to prevent you from doing the bad thing involves kind of destroying your will. Well, literally attempting to destroy your will, to destroy any means of actual freedom to be good. As a little, it's a state where the only thing that matters is outcomes. Only outcomes. Outcomes are the only thing that matters.
Right.
And that is it's a dystopian world, right? Because all of the things that make life beautiful involve, or maybe not all, but many of them involve some kind of metaphorical or maybe metaphysical violence. I will that this piece of music is written. And Ludwig van, right? Beethoven, right? The
Right.
Ninth Symphony, which is a great symphony. There's
Yes, I performed it. Yes.
Oh, you did. That's
Yes.
awesome. One of my faves. To make anything great kind of involves you maybe like just being like, I will make this happen and it will be beautiful. There's something violent about that. And it's interesting in the book that those violent impulses, which can be used to make beautiful things, are the same kind of impulses that can be twisted to make to break beautiful things and destroy beautiful things. And the right like this it's the real dystopia, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is the destruction of beauty out of a sense of out of only valuing safety, and that the public in the novel seems to be clamoring for that. I mean, up until the end, and they see what sort of Alex DeLarge is sort of like the what happened. He's sort of the poster child for what can happen when you try to reprogram somebody. But like people willingly cede their humanity for some modicum of safety, which I think, dystopia is a place where things, don't work out well.
Right.
Um, the British public cedes their parts of their humanity, or at least is at least willing to sacrifice maybe the dregs of their society, and they are dregs, they're droogs and dregs. They are the worst people, but they're still humans. And when you start treating them not like humans, and I'm not talking about punishing crimes, we're talking about remaking a human. Um, it's not like the society gets any better. Like there's still violent crime. Now you just have the police doing crime. So anyhow, I'm jumping around a bit, but I think all of these things really that's dystopian. I mean, it's maybe a slightly more soft dystopian, but I mean, I also think that that's a kind of dystopia that we live in now. And this is written in the early 60s. This is the reprogramming, this is how we're going to make you think better, or even just act better. Like, you can believe what you want at home, but you're going to have to use the preferred language in the workplace. And if you don't
But
do that, there's consequences. And so the self-censoring, the sort of the internalized regime is, I mean, all of these things, I'll pass it back to you, but all of those things make this a very dystopian novel.
I 100% agree with your take on making this dystopian, and how I appreciate how you classified it as the forgotten dystopian novel, because no one, I mean, there's probably good reason that no one reads this in like schools, because it's a little bit too,
Yeah, I can't
graphic for that.
imagine. This is probably more of like a college level, although now
Yeah,
in current academia, they will not let you read this. This is a no-no book.
probably not. Yeah.
Yeah, nobody is going to assign this. No English teachers, no intro to, even in a class on dystopian literature, they would 100% assign 1984, but then also like Handmaid's Tale. They would not do Clockwork Orange.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I wanted to push back on something that you said,
Okay.
because it gets to the core of, I mean, it gets to the core of the somewhat politicization of the theme of politicization throughout the book. So we are jumping into the deep end here, but you open the door, so I'm going to take the leap.
Yeah.
Um,
Just don't cross the streams, and you'll be fine.
I
Until you
got
want to close the door, then you do cross them. Yeah.
I was under the impression, again, this is my first time ever reading this book. I took in the fact that, well, to set this up, because you sort of teased it, but for those of you who didn't read it, haven't read it, don't want to read it, the idea is, like you said, this narrator, Alex, is violent, gangster type young man who accidentally, I use air quotes with
Yeah.
accidentally, kills an elderly woman. He doesn't necessarily mean to kill her, but he does, hurt her pretty badly, and it ends up in her death. So he gets put in jail, as would normally happen. But this is the interesting thing from what I took from it. In jail, in prison, there's a lot of violence still going on within the walls of the prison. And for a violent offender, you're not fixing the problem as in you're not you're not stopping someone from being more violent by putting them in a violent scenario. So the state, the government felt like, well, this is our chance to use this new psychological
Ludovico's.
technique
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
to break you of this violence by programming you and reconditioning your brain to become physically ill when you see and or think about violence. So I took it to be we wanted to put you in prison, but that's not going to actually help the problem. So we have to resort to this thing, this new psychological test.
Yep.
That was intriguing to me. But there's an underlying problem there of is is the prison system as it is today or in the world today, is that actually rehabilitating people?
No.
Because I think that's what it gets to. That's one of the points that this book gets to.
Yeah, that is one of the main questions that the book asks. Um, or maybe this is more of my question. I don't know if the book explicitly asks this. Well, no, the book asks it too, and I don't think the book answers it. Like any good story, it doesn't answer these questions. Are there some people who are beyond rehabilitation?
Are you asking me personally?
Well, I don't know. Like, is Alex
Um,
beyond rehabilitation? Because the programming works, but then drives him to attempt, spoilers, suicide by jumping out of a window because he can't take it anymore. His like the only things in his life that were actually kind of good, the things he really enjoyed, so like music, largely music, and some of the best music, right? Like that's the thing is for somebody who's so horribly violent, his musical tastes are really nice. He grasps beauty despite being a monster.
yeah.
So you remove that from him, perhaps justifiably so, right? Maybe he deserves all of it,
Well,
but
I think the music is put in there to give him a sense of humanity. Like he's not just some
yeah,
grotesque monster.
but you remove that, so then he attempts suicide. It doesn't work out, and so it's like he's not. And then they deprogram him. But okay, so like you're not. He's neither rehabilit. There's no well, and then there's this ambiguous last chapter that we'll talk about at some point. Like it's unclear what it seems like at the end. Maybe he wants to make a change, but like I feel like if he does make a change, and it's unclear if he does, but if he does, it's going to be sort of in spite of all of the stuff, both the punishment, the reprogramming, and the reprogramming. Like there seems to be like that's I don't, that's not where goodness comes from. And I think that's also kind of one of the main points that Burgess is trying to get across is like that virtue cannot be. I mean, you need a virtuous society, but the state can't create virtue. Um,
Yes.
the state like actively defiles virtue because in order to stop him from being violent, it destroys the last bit of virtue he had, or the last bit, the ability to enjoy the last virtuous things he had.
Yeah.
Um, and that's, I think, again, that's not like a solution to any problem, but I do think there's something. It's an answer to the modernist "we can make the world better" kind of a mentality. It's a critique of that, at least. Like this is, I mean, if people want to be bad, they can be bad, right? Like if somebody really wants to do nasty things, they can do it if they're motivated enough and they're smart enough to do it, or just vicious enough, which I think is more the case of Alex, right? Just like sociopath, like just really not caring
Right.
about
I
you.
don't think.
you can't stop that, right? Like you can punish the behavior. And I don't think Burgess is arguing for we need to have no punishment. I don't think he's saying that at all.
Right, right,
And
right,
he's not saying let everyone back out on the streets because they're so great to be around with normal people. That's not what he's saying. I think he's saying something like, what are we as quote unquote good people willing to give up in order to get, you know, in order to stop evil? Because if you give up if you sacrifice the ability to create beautiful things in the world or for people to appreciate virtue, you're not getting good people. It's the C.S. Lewis Men Without Chests bit. I don't know if you know that his famous bit about, right, like you remove someone's, like basically like you remove someone's heart and then you wonder why they don't love, right? Like you program away, you attempt to program away the things that that can produce goodness in order to maybe, to prevent evil, but then what are you left with? You don't have goodness anymore. People are unwilling to,
right.
you critique hierarchy and nobody's loyal anymore, right? Like these
Yeah.
kinds of problems. I think it's sort of in that vein, and I'll try to shut up and put it back to you. But that's like these are real questions that the 20th century did not solve, and we are still dealing with them very much right now. But it's interesting and it's kind of depressing that in the 60s this book is being written. And this feels the kind of this kind of street behavior, the kind of crime that's described in exquisite detail, I will say, by Alex as about what he does. Like it's all in the first person.
Right.
Um, Reminds me of a lot of the stuff that I either have seen in
Hmm.
my case in Seattle or read about in terms of police reports and stuff like that. They're like just the like violence for no real like there doesn't even appear to be a reason of why somebody did this thing. Like why'd you punch that person in the face? It seems like they just felt like it in the moment, so they just did it. There was not like a to take anything all the time. There's no like objective reason all the times for the stuff that the bad things that are happening. That felt very topical, like the wanton destruction of people and property and things. Just so
One,
we haven't solved this problem. Like these are really this book could be it could have been written now. You maybe the reprogramming technology would have to do more with like AI or something, or you could throw in some more sci-fi bing bang boom BS and it would make it feel more like nowadays. But or maybe it's like Alexa AI is going to reprogram the world. It might be a little bit more like cyberpunk like that. But I mean, what is advertising if not programming? What is community action programs if not programming? I mean, it's all programming. Anyhow, I will try to shut up for real, but like it's topical.
yeah, and to tie into that, and I'll go back to something that you made me think of in a minute ago. The two films that come to mind with what you just said about people committing crimes just for the hell of it, like for shits and giggles. The Strangers, which is a horror film, and then Funny Games, which is a dark comedy slash horror film. I don't know if anyone out there has seen either of those, you'll understand what I'm saying. If you haven't, go watch them. But in both of these movies, the quote unquote bad guys at some point say to the effect of, well, they're asked, "What do you do? Why are you doing this to us? Why are you killing us? Why are you torturing us?" And they just respond, "Well, because you were home. Like we had nothing else to do. We're just doing this." It's for our own amusement. I mean,
Yeah.
the title "Funny Games" kind of lends you to believe that these people are torturing people for the fun of it. Um, but those two films were not made to be quote unquote realistic, right? And Funny Games specifically was definitely not made to be realistic. And if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, I won't spoil it. Um, but to go backwards a little bit, I think Burgess also makes a commentary about government in a way that I don't think he meant to, because you brought up a very good point. It's almost like a false choice of, do we rehabilitate you in a failed prison system, or do we do this experimental thing that removes all goodness out of you and quote unquote fixes the problem? Well, those aren't the only two options, right? So the government is to, I don't know, Are they too stupid? Are they too lazy to figure out some other way to rehabilitate people? And I
Well,
think
the
that's a
technique
commentary
works.
that I know,
It
but that's a
actually works.
commentary. But that's a commentary on the government that I think
Yeah.
Burgess is making, even if he's not making it on purpose. Is that they pick these two extremes, if you will, and there's no like middle ground where we can still
Well,
effectively do something,
there's also
removing
there's
someone's
also
humanity.
there's also no non-political solution in the that the government attempt like nobody tries a non-political solution. And what do I mean by that? Well, like I mean if you look at like Alex's home life, I mean his he's in charge of his parents. There's no parental authority. There's no paternal authority, particularly. His father is a weak man
Right.
who exerts no control over him at all whatsoever. Um, and it's I think it's also sort of one of these wicked problems of like there's a cultural sickness of like there is no the world of Clockwork Orange is I mean it the parenting like there's no parenting, there's no home authority, there's nothing like that. It is like the children are raising themselves to be monsters. Is kind of the vibe you get. Um, so much so that it's like an entire subset of the society. That there's sort of the the droogs. He's got the he has his droogs, his friends. They all speak this very, which is interesting as a link from a linguistic perspective. It's an interesting bit of world building that they all speak this future slang, which is heavily influenced by Russian, called Nadzat, which is related to the word Nadzat, which means teen. So it's like the teen speak, but there's this like interesting kind of Slavic. It's like Cockney rhyming slang mixed with a lot of like heavy Slavic admixture. And so this isn't just Alex and his friends, his droogs that created this. This is actually like this is a society-wide kind of it's thieves' cant if anyone plays D&D. It's like there's a lot of these kinds. You get the impression it's hinted at that like there's multiple gangs groups doing violence just around the sit like it's probably like London, like it's like around the area, like this is a nationwide phenomenon. The kids just talk this way, but associated with this dialect or this argot, probably the slang, whatever you want to call it, is a culture of ultra violence. And so like but yeah, these are deep sicknesses in the society. And I mean, it is kind of like I like to say, there's a sucking chest wound in bad future Britain in this book, and the government, the state, is attempting to put a band-aid over a sucking chest wound and be like, this ought to do it. Um, you know, what if we just take away people's ability to be good? And then they can't be bad, at least. Um, I think also too, it's just the idea. I mean, things that connect to stuff. A lot of stuff I see now, is just this lack of willingness to view people as humans. And I don't just mean that in everyone be nice to each other kind of sense. I mean that in like humans are capable of great evil, and they treat like the state treats Alex, who is capable of great evil and does great evil, not as a human. And I don't mean that like, oh, if they were just nice to him, he would be a good human. What I mean is they treat him like a Clockwork Orange, right? Like they treat him like a wind-up toy. That if we just change these components that are just off these mechanical problems to you, you now are a paragon of virtue, right? Um, it that is there's a complete dehumanization, right? Like the willingness
Yes.
to understand that humans are capable of being bad is notable too. I think it's I mean like the world of the novel is incredibly materialistic, I guess I'm trying. There's only a materialistic understanding of the world. And like the one character who has a non-materialist understanding of the world is the prison chaplain, and he's like the only one who expresses some sort of trepidation about like the consequences of this kind of a technique being not only tried on Alex, but becoming popularized as like a method for fixing behavior. Um,
The interesting thing is, and we talked about it ruined, the one thing that sort of made him human, and the one thing that sparked joy was the music, right? And it ruined that for him. But it wasn't done intentionally, right? So it speaks to two things of, I mean, yes, the author wrote it in this way for a reason because, that was the literary thing to do it and to really tie in that, I can also quash joy when I'm reprogramming this person. But they also, Burgess also included in there the fact that when the people, the government or the doctors, I guess, performing this um, experimental stuff on him, found out, right, that he liked music and that he was being, um, he lost his love for music because of what they did, they laughed about it, right? So it wasn't intentional, number one. So that's kind of a good thing, I guess. Like it wasn't like they were trying to sabotage his one joy. But then on top of it, they laughed when they found out that they did.
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of, I don't know, a 1-2 punch at the same time. For lack of a better way to explain that, if that makes any sense,
Yep.
what I'm trying to
Makes
get
sense.
at. I guess my point is they weren't purposely trying to remove joy from someone's life by reprogramming him.
But that's what happened.
Right, right.
And
And instead of when they found out, instead of like stopping or trying to find some other way to fix it, they kept going and laughed about it, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
yeah. And that's because I think part of it too is maybe this is just me as somebody who speaks German. The word for violence in German, Gewalt, is also the word for like control. And
Huh.
and well, it can be seen as control, and it can also mean force. And so German has like the semantic boundaries are different in German. And so what does that have to do with this novel that's written in this funky future English? It's, violence. We tend to think of violence in modern English, at least I do. Modern sense of the word is like only harm happening via force, right? Like a violent attack, a violent assault. But there is something violent about forcing something, right? Whether that be good, bad, or in the middle, right? There's something violent about that because you're taking somebody, like whether that's like I said earlier, like willing a song into existence. You're writing a song, you're creating poetry or something like that. But also like there can be something violent in this broad sense of the word, I think, about virtue in that, you can do, there can be a kind of a quote unquote violent virtue in the sense of like doing what is necessary to save someone can be, you're changing, you're moving in and you're intervening and you're doing something drastic, right? You're drastically change, like if you've had to do an intervention on a family member or something like that, right? Hopefully don't actually hurt anybody, but like broadly speaking, there's something violent about that. You're not making good decisions for yourself. You need to, we all care about you. You need to stop doing this. You're hurting everyone. Like that's not a nice thing to do, right? Like there's something really willful and forceful to that. If you're going to do it, right, and hopefully you're also doing it with love, but there is something quote unquote violent about that. So I think Burgess is touching on this, that not all virtues are passive, I guess is what I'm trying to say. There are passive virtues and there are active virtues. And I know I'm speaking to a bead rattler here. So I know y'all are all about this. Right? There's the passive like hope, expectation, but then there's like the go do good things, make good, like there's something to that. You remove the drive or the ability to have anything forceful, people can't do anything. So they're stuck in this zone, which is what happens to Alex, right? I guess that's what I'm trying to say. He's stuck where he can neither be bad nor good. And so he just is like, and his life degrades to this point where he just doesn't want to live anymore. And I do think that actually, I think the government in the story, right, the state is would be quite pleased that he just would have tried to off himself, right? It's only because the intervention of the political left, hilariously, right, the sort of the bleeding heart liberals in the book who talk about him as this case of of reprogramming gone wrong and sort of make him the poster child, try to make him a poster child for a movement. It's only because of them that he even really gets they attempt to fix his programming, right? Like they attempt to undo what they did to him. And because otherwise I feel like he'd just be another, scratch one criminal, right? Like one more baddie off the list.
Yeah.
I don't know if any of that made sense, but I mean, I think
No,
it
it
does.
does. Yeah.
Yeah, like that the government really, the state in the book really does not give a shit, I guess. And that feels very much like America. Like I know this is
Right.
future Britain, but that feels like America today. They don't care about you. They don't care. They
This
don't care
is,
whether the roads work. They don't care whether you'll get treatment for your injury. They don't care. They
they
don't
don't
care.
care. They don't care if they've made a mistake and accidentally messed up your credit score. Hint back to a SCROTUS episode that
Yeah.
we've recorded recently. Yeah, the government does not care about you. So we talk about this quite a bit on our different podcasts that we do together. Um, I kind of want to get your take on. We have two sort of things to hit before we wrap this up. The language. I want to talk about the language that you hinted at, and then the last chapter. So which would you like to tackle first?
Uh, let's leave the last chapter for the end. That feel like that fits.
Okay.
There's something eschatological about that. The
So
end, last things at the last. Yeah.
I have to say about the language, the linguistic intricacies of this book. While you mentioned it's a short book and it's a fast read, it kind of has to be a fast read because I found myself, I read part one because it's separated into three parts. I read part one and it took me after probably chapter two in part one to go, okay, now I'm getting used to this
Yeah,
new
you learn as you
jargon,
go.
and you start to read a little bit faster and it starts clicking. But I took a little trip, and so I put down the book for a few days, picked it up 2 to 3 days later to start part two, and I found myself I hadn't learned enough, like I hadn't retained enough, and I had to slow down a second again as I started reading part two and go, let me get back into this. So if those of you who have read this book or want to read this book, be warned that you need to read it in a short amount of time.
Yeah, I'm somebody who likes language as is Mitch. I've also tried my hand at some conlanging, creating languages for fun, and this is essentially a con slang. Like this is a future slang.
Yeah.
So it's cool for me to see what Burgess was doing here. I'm like, oh, I see what you're doing here. The reinterpretations of the Russian as it's being borrowed into the English is interesting. Like even just things like so, he says real horror show, right? And that's in the movie, the Kubrick movie as well, and the movie's
Yeah.
great. Real horror show. Okay, so it's written as horror show, right? And it is a horror show. The whole thing is a horror. It's a show of horrors. It's awful. Like what Alex and his droogs do to people is terrifying, and vicious. I mean, it's like animal level brutality that is particularly. As much as I think the book is better, the movie shows you in long Kubrick cuts of what they're doing, and it is not easy to watch. Um,
Which is why I think, quite honestly, this book was allowed to be written because had it been written in, common tongue, if you will,
yeah,
it would have been much more graphic, obviously, because when you're reading it in these words that you don't quite understand and your mind is putting some of the pieces together, but somehow it's not quite as graphic and as bad as if you were reading it in words that you were absolutely sure meant what you thought they meant.
oh yeah, I
So
agree.
yeah, there's something
No,
about that language that
there
that
is.
helps you. It braces it.
There is so, like, but yeah, just to finish the point about horror show, like there's a lot of this, right? But the horror show, so it's a real
Yes.
horror show, but he says real horror show. Okay, so that's a reinterpretation of хорошо, which means like good, well in
Oh,
Russian.
okay.
So хорошо, you'll hear, if you speak some I don't speak Russian, but I can kind of understand snippets of it, right? Хорошо, like it's хорошо, but it's reinterpreted as horror show.
Yeah.
And so there's these cool double entendres that like Alex doesn't mean, maybe Alex does mean it as a double entendre. I think Alex just kind of loves the violence and says, "Oh no, it's real horror show." But you as the reader, you're like, "Oh, horror show. It's a horror show," but this guy loves it because it's horror show. So there's Burgess, like, had learned, the story I've read is that he learned at like a just survival level Russian before traveling to St. Petersburg, I think, and then like used his experience of barely learning like just small bits of Russian to be like, what would it be like if that Russian started percolating into British slang. I think that I remember reading that was his sort of the inception of his idea for the language of the novel. I will say I had never read I've James Joyce. I'm not even going to try to do Finnegan's Wake to talk about language, the book that makes no sense. But I'd never read a book where, I've read Lord of the Rings, obviously big Tolkien guy. Okay, there's conlang all throughout that, right? Like Tolkien created multiple languages, they show up in his world,
Right.
but it's not like he's writing in Quenya. He's not writing in Sindarin. He's writing in the common tongue rendered as English. And then if a character is speaking, if Legolas is saying something, right, in Sindarin, it'll show up, baby, right?
Right.
And you'll be like, oh, there's other languages in this world of Middle Earth. But I never really like picked up a book and gone, oh, this whole book is written in Alex's voice. That made me, the first time I read it, so happy. I was like, oh my gosh, it's like, and the idea of the experience of learning, you learn it as you go, which is kind of neat. I also did a bit of a cheating when I first read this. I went on to Wikipedia and found a dictionary of Nadsat slang that just users had created, and they actually will show whenever possible this is the related to from the Russian blah, which was kind of cool too to see
Yeah.
on sort of the back end how Burgess was creating this slang as he was going. And so yeah, that's I guess my overall take on the language. Fascinating, cool, although I will say big asterisk. I am a strange one who likes to learn new languages, who likes to create languages when I have time, right? Work on that kind of stuff. Who it's a great part of the world building, but it is not accessible, right? Like it's not
Yes.
a very accessible way of writing. But I really like your point that I hadn't quite thought of that. So thank you for that. That even just from a publishing perspective, this might have had a hard, I think my understanding is it had a hard time getting published as it is because it is so violent and obscene. And I mean, like sexual assault is treated like nothing, like in this book.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
descriptions of it that are like, you're like, oh, wow. Um, but had it been written in sort of the Queen's English, there's no way,
No.
no way. But you can say, well, it's future slang, and maybe it doesn't mean what you think it means. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Okay, well, let it slide, right? Like so, and I would not surprise me. I've not read about it, but it would not surprise me if Burgess is also playing that game with censors, right? Like this is the '60s. There's
Yeah.
and the playing the game with censors. Um, so anyhow,
I I must admit, as a linguist, and I will preface again, reiterate what you said. This is not a book for people that maybe do not find languages quite so easy to pick up because it's going to take you a while to really dive into it.
you have to find language fascinating. I think there's books that are
Yeah.
just hard to read, that are still worth reading. I think this is one of those. I think if you find language, if you find all of like the societal, philosophical implications that we've been talking about interesting, read it. But I think if you find language interesting, I think you should also read it. Like even if you only speak English, if you're fascinated by language,
Well, and
this
as
it gives you a new perspective. It literally teaches you as you go.
yeah,
It's a pedagogical novel too. Like it teaches you this English that doesn't exist.
but as a linguist, I kept getting a little bit annoyed because I would read on and I would be like, I'm pretty sure I know what that word means now, and then he uses it in a way, and I'm like, wait, it doesn't really make sense with what I thought it meant.
You're learning your semantic boundaries.
Right. And so I had to sort of, reframe it in terms of semantics, into meaning something slightly differently. And I think for one example, is it is it smek? Uh,
Smack. Yeah.
so at first I thought that meant smile because it made sense. And then a couple times he used it in a way that clearly it meant laugh.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait, does it mean smile and laugh or just laugh? And I wasn't ever quite sure.
Well, you also have to think about like the differences between British English and American English, right? To have a laugh, as Fred would say, right? A laugh. Oh,
Yeah.
it's a laugh. So there's a there, right? That's the thing too, is it's not it is a British most of the dystopian novels, not all, but most of them are British, right? So there's this kind of like Burgess is playing with British English, not American English. So there's multiple levels of separation, right? But from the American English, right? So yeah, smack is one of those that there's a kind of an interesting wideness to that word. What does smek really mean? I mean, you find this too with the other a lot of the other created words. Um, I,
Yeah,
I thought
and
it was interesting too from like a derivational morphology. We've lost all the viewers, apologies. From a derivational morphology level, right? You get like von, which means smell, right?
okay.
Smell. But you'd be like, you vonny bastards, like you smelly bastards. So there's this word that's being drawn. I believe von is from Russian, but then but Alex, the narrator, is attaching like productive adjective endings in English to the word. So it's, and I mean, and that's kind of interesting too. So there's a lot of playfulness with the language. And yeah, I mean, is the Nadsat slang entirely internally consistent? Maybe, maybe not. It's not like Burgess gives you the dictionary. Again, the dictionary I was using was created by readers, right? Like after the fact, making their best guess on some things. So it was a user created thing. It wasn't like Burgess be like, please find the handy word list at the back of the novel. There is none
Right.
of that.
And
Yeah.
the last nerdy thing that I'll add before we try to get some of these listeners back
Yeah. Yeah.
is part of speech. Because on occasion I would find a word being used, and I understand that, if it's coming from Russian and different things. Now that I know that, I honestly didn't know until you mentioned it. Some of these words are being used, I think sometimes, and I wish I had made a note of it. I apologize, but I could have sworn one time it was used as a noun, and then another time it was used as a verb, and another
Mhm.
time it was used as an adjective. And I'm like, well, you can't have all three of those. Like,
Well, I don't know. Maybe this is just sorry. We before we lose everyone, as somebody who's studied some Creole languages, you can have there's some kinds of languages in the world in the planet where you can have largely interchangeable parts of speech. So
I no, you're absolutely right.
maybe that's what NADZAT does. You don't know it.
You are
it
100% correct.
yeah,
Linguistically speaking, I know that, but if we're going to pretend that this is any kin to English, we need to make it a little bit more close to English. I understand the verb. Uh,
yeah.
there's a verb noun
I kind of,
connection
I
that
kind of
that
maybe
we
that's
do
a
in English.
maybe it's a boo-boo on Burgess's part. I think it's kind of a feature, not a bug. I think that's part of it. I think that this is a form of speech used by criminals, and you find, I mean, that's a real thing that exists in the real world. Not this particular slang, but like criminal slang is a thing.
Yeah,
I mean, for Pete's sake, watch a Guy Ritchie film, right? Like, watch Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, watch Snatch, watch any of those. Like those, I mean, it's played up for effect, but like criminal slang, you have it in the United States as well. I'm currently rewatching the greatest show ever made, The Wire. And I mean, in the high rises in West Baltimore, like you're getting some deep level drug slang from 20 years ago, right? But you're like, whoa, and it's a similar kind of thing. Where I'm watching, I mean, this is the second year in a row I've watched it, so I'm trying to watch it every year because it's such a good show. I'm watching it with my wife. She has never seen the show before, and she's like, I need subtitles for a lot of these people. I'm like, it won't help you because these are slang terms, right? That are being used, and this is a way slang is not inherently criminal, but slang and crime goes together because slang is a way of hiding. It's a code, right? In many respects, it's a
yeah,
code. This kind of a slang is used for hiding intentions, hiding, information about illicit activities. So that, I mean, it's constantly changing too, right? Like an argot will constantly shift around, and maybe that's part of what Burgess is trying to show here is that like maybe it doesn't really matter the differences between parts of speech. Maybe what matters is just the general, like, this is a term we use to talk about doing bad things with people, right? And so anything having to do with, getting hit is Tolchok, right?
right, right.
Okay, so Tolchok is like this general smashing, right? Verb, but it's also a noun. It gave him a Tolchok, right?
Right. That I can understand, but I swear there was one
No, you're
instance
right.
where
I should have written it. There's a couple times where there's like a apparent mix up, but I mean, I think that the explanation to take it out of autist land for 2 seconds is that already failed. We're already in autist land. We'll never leave. Is that like Alex doesn't care, right? Like the people who speak this don't care. They care about ultraviolence and maintaining control of their pack. Because really the group, right? The groups of the gangs function almost exactly like wolf packs, and I mean, like even in the way that the individual members talk to each other, the way Alex attempts to maintain dominance over that. I mean, they're like packs of animals is how they move and think and hunt, and they hunt people, right? Like
Yeah.
so. Anywho,
So to get to this last part about the final chapter and whether it is, needed or not, in your opinion,
mm,
I would like, if I can so be indulged, I would like to read the publisher's note since it's very short at the back here.
okay,
Because, and I'm saying this because I literally read, book cover to cover, and I almost didn't read this publisher's note because it's on the very last page. I was like, okay, well, that was the end of the book. I'll close it. I'm done. But it was so short, and I was like, well, let me see what they've added here. And so the publisher's note says this. This new American edition of A Clockwork Orange, as the author so forcefully puts it in his introduction, is longer by one chapter, the last. This chapter was included in the original British edition, but dropped from the American edition and therefore from Stanley Kubrick's film version. The author and his American publisher, who is delighted to give this fascinating book a new and larger life, differ in their memories as to whether or not the dropping of the last chapter, which changed the book's impact dramatically, was a condition of publishing or merely a suggestion made for conceptual reasons. Whichever is true, the larger truth is that A Clockwork Orange is a modern classic which must indeed be made available, but to Anthony Burgess's American readers, precisely in the form he wishes it to be. It is done. It is so done, excuse me. So I'm really glad I ended up reading that at the end because I then went back and went, okay, well, what would have happened if that last chapter hadn't been there? And it is so dramatically different, and it didn't register in my head as I was reading it that if the book had ended without that last chapter, there was no hope. Like it was a sad ending.
yeah. I
But then
saw.
the final chapter gives a little bit of hope. So go for it.
Well, yeah. Well, I saw the movie first, and then, as always is with these Kubrick adaptations, I see the movie first and then read the book. In the case of The Shining, I still think the movie's better. In the case of Clockwork Orange, I like the book better. But I love me some Kubrick. Yeah. The last chapter. So if you've only seen if you've only seen the movie, you Vonnie Brachny, go out and read it. Read the book. No, the last chapter has this Alex experiences extreme ennui. He's sort of cured, right? He's cured not of his sociopathy. He's cured of the programming that was put onto him. He's largely patched up and sent on his way. He has a fancy job now, working for like sound preservation and stuff like music preservation for the state. So they gave him a music job, like a kind of a musical job, and he has time and money to go out and be a droog, with his droogs and go commit ultraviolence if he wants. But all of the things that he used to take, pleasure from, buying drinks for old women, with sexual favors implied later, going out and beating people to a pulp, beating his own gang members, fighting other gang, all these things kind of he just sort of don't spark joy anymore. They've really much lost their luster, and so he passes the keys on, so to speak, of the kingdom to. And says, I kind of want to do something else. And the funny thing is it makes it sound like he's so old, but he's like 18 or 19. He's like, I'm an old man now. Because you kind of forget. They do tell you earlier in the story, but you forget that he's like 15. He's a
Yeah.
teenager committing these ultraviolence, right? Which feels crazy. But again, I'll bring it back to because it's on my mind. It is a great show. You bring it back to like shows like The Wire, which quite are not accurate in all ways, but do a good job, I think, overall of displaying how crime functions within societies and in culture. Having younger people committing the bare minimum illegal acts, but sometimes incredibly violent acts is not, unfortunately, is not unique. It's not just an adult phenomenon. And so you really see in the last chapter here that that Alex is not really that old, but he thinks he's old. And maybe that's because he's done so much, like so much bad stuff, right? Like he's grown up really fast in this insane way. Um, Grown up more than I hope anyone grows up, right? Like grown up to become something horrendous, gets a taste, you could say, of his own medicine in sort of the state's failed attempt to rehabilitate him, then thinks he's got one over on the state, and by he kind of has, right? Like he's got to commit the crimes. He's been tortured for it, but then gets rewarded for having been tortured for it. So it's like this weird kind of like back to square one in some ways. Um, and then he starts, it's interesting. He just feels older. And so he starts thinking about like, well, what am I going to do now? And meets an old friend, right? So somebody who used to be sort of in the life, quote unquote, to borrow like a mafia term, right? Like in the life, used to be part of that, who's moved on apparently and has like a wife and is like also like 19. These are not old people, but, um, and then it ends and it doesn't really give you like a, this is what he's going to do now. But he has this idea of, well, maybe I could have a wife, maybe I could have a, you know, a child. But it just sort of, and it's sort of like it's him talking to you, dear viewer, right, or dear reader, at the end, right? Like there's because again, he's been addressing you this whole time. It totally changes the vibe of the flow of the novel. It also changes like sort of the message of the novel. Um, it seems almost like to me in the end here, Alex is being tempted by the good, right? Like he's actually, and he's somebody who's filled his life with so much evil that the good feels like he's skeptical of the good, right? It's like the good you could he's it's almost like he's being tempted to virtue. And it's like,
Right.
will he give in to the temptation to do virtuous things? And that's also interesting. And I mean, I think it's just it's a deftly done little thing that Burgess does at the end here.
Because,
Yeah, go ahead.
well, the last chapter completely changes it, the trajectory in my mind, because just as you said, it gives this hope, but he's now he's now been cured of the experiment that they did on him, and so he's almost back to square one. But it's suggesting in my mind that this is coming with age, right?
Yeah,
So he's maturing out of this violent stage into a, well, now I'm actually, I can progress in my life
yeah,
and be a real man, be a contributing member of society. And so is the idea, yes, these kids were not parented properly, but life sort of works that stuff out on its own if we give it enough time.
if we give it enough time, and that also implies, or it asks some questions about like, well, what is the role of the state then, and vis-a-vis violent crime, particularly, right? Like, is the role of the state rehabilitation, or is the role of the state to protect people and property, right? Like, because the state clearly fails at this rehabilitation thing. And if it's a big if, but if Alex becomes better, it's not going to be because of the state, right? Like,
Right.
and that's pretty clear. It's like that's not what it is. There's something else is happening here. Um, yeah, it's interesting too because you and I are both males and with different life experience, but I mean, at least speaking for myself, right? Like, I mean, humans have predation instincts, right? Like, regardless of whether you're male or female, that exists, right? Like, if somebody tries to hurt you, there's an instinct, there's fight or flight, right? And sometimes you will fight. But it is in our, this is really going to get the show canceled. Mitch, there's inherent biological differences between men and women. Not only are
You
those
don't
categories real, but
say.
they're Mars and Venus, baby. We are from different planets. There is something very, okay, I never went around doing ultra violence like this, but there's the aggression is a thing, right? And dealing with aggression growing up, going through like that 15, 16-year-old period is rough.
It's
For most,
it's biological.
it's biological. So this comes out of our past, right? When you needed to fight other humans off and fight big monsters every day, right? To stay alive. That was what you did. Thankfully, we don't necessarily live in that world, but the problem is that those, right? We're the same, right? We are, in the words of, sadly now, the past poetical genius, Jimmy Buffett, we are cavemen in faded blue jeans. We are biologically like cavemen, more or less. There's some differences, but it's almost exactly. You'd be surprised. All the expert stuff I've read is we're basically the same. So a lot of what society has to deal with, and always really has had to deal with once you start getting more complex societies, is okay, we have this, hunter, be hunted, are you hunted or hunter background? You have this hunter gatherer background, let's say, like built into your genes. Men have more testosterone, have a bit more muscle density, right? Like men can do things that women can't do. By the way, women give birth and give birth to new life. So it's not like women aren't amazing. Like this is people who talk about the patriarchy all day. I think they also patriarchy all day hate women too. I mean, I think they loathe everyone. But men are like, when you go through puberty, and particularly not like the beginning of puberty, but like getting into high school age, you start like, if you're working out, right? And unfortunately, Alex is working out in the sense that he's going out and fighting like every night. He's doing like Fight Club shit every night.
Yeah.
You'll actually get good at fighting, right? You'll actually improve at fighting if you're vicious enough. You'll learn how to do it, and your body will get tougher and your mind will get tougher. These are not, I mean, this is dangerous, right? Because you just contribute to more violence in the world, but there's a biological imperative to do that. I think for me, one of the things I'm most thankful for going through my like mid to late teenager years, my NADZAT years, right? Since NADZAT means teen, was that I had contact sports, right? It wasn't just sports, but it was sports where you could actually go out and hit people and get hit. And you learned what it was to hit somebody and learn what it was to get hit, right?
Yeah.
And but it was moderated. There were some rules, there was some protective equipment. It still hurt, right? Like you could still get injured, right? But there was like if I do a dirty hit on somebody, they're going to dirty hit me, right? Like there was this kind of this like ritualized combat quality to contact sports in particular that I'm not saying everyone needs that, right? But for me, that was useful and that was helpful for me. I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about being a human, but I also learned like it helped me have an outlet for this kind of aggression because you do have it, right? Like, and I see in the society depicted in the novel, like, it doesn't have to be contact sports for everyone, but I look at somebody like Alex DeLarge, I'm like, you would have benefited from something like rugby, right? In a British context, where if you do some nasty thing on somebody, their opposing team's gonna get you back, and you're gonna wish you hadn't done that. And you like have a learning moment where you're like, okay. If we're going to be violent, there has to be some context and rules for it. There has to be conditions for it, right? It's not just ultra violence all the time. It's almost like hopefully you know what I'm saying. Like there's
Yeah.
nothing, the society's not giving an outlet for Alex's violence. It's just saying either we're not going to deal with it at all and you're going to be a total menace, or we're going to completely crush you as a human. And it's like, but everyone has that to certain degrees, right? And obviously he's probably suffering from some sociopathic tendencies, let's say. But it's not like everyone who has those tendencies is out murdering people, right? That's not true either, right? There are people who can technically take tests correctly or correctly can technically be classified as sociopathic who don't do bad things. And there's all sorts of interesting research, and I know we're off the rails here, sorry. But there's interesting research about why certain people go and become like serial killers or something like that, and some people don't. And obviously there's biochemical stuff, there's individual variation, but I think part of it is also social, right? Like if you give young men outlets for that, it tends to work better as a society overall, right? But if you remove all of that, if you remove any sort of aggression, you either get none and you have no beauty, or you have no creation of beauty, or you have all and you only have destruction. So I don't know. I think that's also something that you see that theme runs throughout the novel, but it's very clearly shown for me in that last chapter. If he's getting older, and so he's like, maybe he's just mentally is changing, And it's like
Right.
if somebody had intervened earlier, would he have gotten as bad as he did? Maybe. There are just evil people that exist too. But a lot of people are usually somewhere in the middle, right? Like, uh, anyhow, sorry for the rant, but that I think that last chapter does contextualize the whole novel because you see the changes starting to happen in Alex DeLarge, and then you read it back on all the nasty shit that happened previously in the novel, and you're like, oh, maybe he's starting to learn. Maybe it unfortunately took him killing someone to do that, but and then trying to kill himself to do that. But maybe that and it's a big maybe, right? There's no
And
bow at the end. It's just
it ends on the question of, was it the traumatic stuff he just went through that we just read about in the reprogramming and then losing the reprogramming, all of that stuff? Did all of that then shape him into, okay, maybe I should change my lifestyle? Or was it just a natural, I'm getting older? And I think Burgess is hinting at the latter here, where he's again, you hinted at it, or you directly said it. They're like 19, but he's saying, "Oh, I'm so old," right? This idea of I'm progressing in my years, I need to get my crap together, right?
yeah.
I think that's the probably the answer, but it is an open-ended question of, was it all the trauma he just went through that kind of sparked this in his brain as well?
And,
It could go hand in hand.
and even yeah, it's and even if it is just that he's getting older, it's like okay, well, what does that say about society's role in shepherding young men, into being responsible and not horrifically violent people, creatures? I think because the society depicted in the novel is not doing that at all. It's actually encouraging it because the ex gangsters are being recruited as cops and they're like beating people to death. It's in the woods. It's like,
Yeah.
so
Well, those of you who haven't read it, go read it. Um, it is a fascinating book, and as Colin said, the lost sort of dystopian novel that no one really reads anymore, or at least is not forced to read in schools. Probably for good reason again. But next month, or at the end, I guess at the end of this month, we will be talking about The Trial by Kafka and how
prepare to
absurd,
get canceled.
yeah, how absurd, I guess, again, I haven't read this yet, but I know of it, and I know that it's about basically someone who's accused of crimes and they can't really say what the crime is and they can't say why he's being put on trial and or apprehended. So it's an absurd kind of view of government and their role in crushing people, I guess.
It's the common theme of all of all of our episodes here.
There must be a reason. There must be a
Yeah,
reason. So yeah, I think we'll enjoy that coming up at the end of January. So stay tuned, keep your eyes peeled. But for right now, we'll put Clockwork Orange back on the shelf.